Hello, and welcome back to Things No One Cares About, or perhaps more aptly, this time, things that fan translators have graciously allowed me to care about. But today I'm going to be talking about Professor Layton and the Phantom Deity, which was a novel. It's one of 3 novels, and if you know about the novels, you might be a little confused why I'm covering this one right now. If you're from the West, you're probably even more confused because you're like, I've literally never heard about this or heard about these novels. It's the second novel out of 3. So there are 3 novels. And this is the second one, but in canon, it comes first. And because I like timeline aspects of things, we're covering the canon order right now. And my eventual plan is to add all these little lost pieces of media. Again, this isn't really lost, but it was never released in the West, so it was lost to me, and I take that personally, so I'm saying that it's lost. But eventually, I want to cover all these little bits and bobs of Layton's story and slot them into my large timeline video, and maybe eventually redo that. So that's kind of my goal here, my goal with covering the Deathly Mirror and other pieces of media. In addition to kind of adding them to the timeline, I also just want to tell more people about them. I didn't know about these novels for a while, and I was really sad when I learned they weren't released in the West, and then really happy when I saw that fan translators translated them. So that's why I'm covering this. And shout out to ProHow94, who translated this novel and translated another novel, Wandering Castle. I will be using scans in this video from ProHow94 and also from Korn, so I'll be using scans from a few different places. So in terms of the timeline, this is, like I mentioned, the first canon novel, but this comes after the events of Eternal Diva. Also in this, Luke is 10, and this story, and I believe all the novels are written from his POV. So because most people are not familiar with this plot, I'm going to be going through chapter by chapter, and then I'm also going to try to include the puzzles. And I want to kind of edit it with like almost like a let's read or like a let's play. I don't know. I'm trying something a little bit new here. Please don't zoom in on any of the photos I edited. They're literally horrendous. That's how we're going to do it. And there will be a little section at the end that's like too long to watch because this is probably going to be long, and I get it if you just want to know like a little bit. My feelings aren't hurt if you skip to the end. Let's get into it. Okay, so this mystery starts out with Grosky, Inspector Grosky, our old pal, coming to Layton asking him for help because a letter was sent to him from the Phantom Deity, who is a thief striking all over London and stealing priceless art. So first he stole a Hellenistic sculpture from a secure vault, and then some other works of art, and all of which he's been selling and giving the money to the poor. So sort of like a Robin Hood type thing. And the letter he sent to Grosky is warning of his next crime. So that's the letter for this little entry in Layton's journey. This letter includes a code from the Phantom Deity, which is the puzzle here. And it's been adapted into English, so it'll work. But let's go into puzzle 1. So with the puzzle, just pause if you want to solve it. And then when you think you have the answer, then press play.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So Luke solves the puzzle, and the code reads, 7th July, with snow from a summer sky, I will fly and get the goddess's smile. Again, thank you so much to ProHow94, because this is like crazy hard to translate puzzles like that. So, good work. I'm assuming, I don't know, I don't speak Japanese. I'm going to assume you're right on this. So from the symbols on the letter, the professor deduces that the Phantom Deity must have a high degree of an art education, and Luke realizes that these symbols are made from gold and silver pigments, so this could be a clue about who the Phantom Deity is. Then we have a really brief time skip, and it is July 6th at 11:59 p.m. at the Museum of London. Scotland Yard and the officers are outside trying to catch the thief, and suddenly at midnight it starts snowing. Then smoke begins to rise from the main entrance of the museum, and all the officers rush inside, leaving their posts, but it's not a fire, it's a smoke bomb. After realizing this, they return to their posts, and Grosky and Layton run into the museum director, Director Crowley. So remember that message said something about the goddess and the goddess's smile. So this is a painting, it's like basically the Mona Lisa. So they head to the goddess room, or like the room where this painting is located, and on their way they run into the ghost of the queen's spirit, who's apparently a spirit who haunts the museum. It's like a headless horseman dressed in red holding her crown. So why don't you take a shot at solving this puzzle, or else you won't be able to pass and get into the goddess room.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So Luke chants the queen's name and the ghost disappears. So they head into the next room on the way to the goddess smile, and they come across a Sumerian gold box that starts to make a high noise and shoots out glass balls. Very ominous, threatening box. And then those glass balls shatter because of the noise that is coming from the gold box. So they run out of the room. Some officers are left behind, and Layton's like, they must have been put to sleep using hypnotic gas. And I'm like, okay. Obviously, why wouldn't I have guessed that? But he explains that there was a similar murder case where cyanide gas was put in glass containers and then the killer used a sound to like burst it. I don't know. And Luke's like, okay, but this is an ancient artifact, so why would it be in there? And Layton's like, okay, true, but hold that thought. So everybody hold that thought. So they keep heading down a corridor, and all of a sudden their way is blocked by a wall that shouldn't be. Because remember, Director Crowley, the museum's director, is there, and he's like, there's not usually a wall here, and everyone's like, but there is a wall here right now. And so Luke thinks it's somewhat of a bluff, and that the wall might be made of flimsy material. And Layton's like, correct. Almost like a puzzle.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So they collapse the wall and continue on after realizing that the wall was just cardboard, which is like weird. Luke's like, this is so weird. Why make this crime such a spectacle? And I'm like, well, because you're in a Professor Layton novel. That's just how that goes when you're here. Because what's the intent here though? Like, you know, putting on our detective hats, why do that? Why would somebody want to do that instead of just thieving? And at this point you might be thinking, maybe it's Desclay. This has got his name all over it. But maybe it's not. Who knows? So they finally make it to the goddess room, and the goddess smile, which again is just like the Mona Lisa, I think, is still there. So they beat the Phantom Deity, and that's good. But then Layton starts looking around the room and frantically banging on the walls, proclaiming that these are also fake walls, and that this whole room is fake. So they break down the walls to reveal the goddess room. So it was like a room inside of a room. And in the actual real room, the goddess smile is gone and replaced with the words, I'm here, and the symbols of the Phantom Deity. And so then Layton is like, okay, Crowley, let's cut the BS. And Crowley is like, sir, what do you mean? And Layton explains how it obviously had to be him because it had to be an inside job. I mean, how are you building whole rooms and walls in a museum if you're not like working for the museum? And then Crowley is like, true, you got me. And he rips off a disguise and a coat and shows that he has the painting tied to his chest, and he transforms into the image of the not the masked gentleman, oh my god, wrong game, the image of the Phantom Deity. And then he like starts to float away. So realizing that he's about to float away, Luke asks Grosky to throw him at the Phantom Deity, and he does this as he's floating away into the sky. And so Luke grabs onto him, and the Phantom Deity is like, please let go of me, I don't want you to get hurt. And Luke's like, no, and then he's like, I'm sorry, and so he shakes Luke off. Luke falls onto this Bobby named Lester, and he's okay. And so that was chapter 1. So, chapter 2. The following day, the crew finds the real Director Crowley, and they realize that the other one is imposter. So Emmy now joins the mystery after she runs into Luke, and she's part of this crew now. So they receive another clue from the deity in the form of a newspaper, and the Phantom Deity's next target is a historical jeweled crown that is going to be on display at a wax museum called Madame Du Bois, and it's going to be there for the anniversary of the wax museum's opening. And the crown will be on a wax figure of the king who once owned it. What's weird though is that there's no code on this clue. It's just sort of spelled out. Unless there is a code on the clue. Why don't you take a look?
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So now they have the date and the time of the crime, July 17th, the first day of the 50th anniversary exhibition at the Wax Museum. And at this point, Luke remembers that when he held on to the Phantom Deity, his sleeves smelled like vinegar. So they think he's an art student who smells like vinegar. That's what we have right now. So obviously they head to the event to try to find the thief and prevent this theft from happening. And while they're there, Luke spots his favorite magician, Dark Saz, and he's super excited, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna go talk to him, and then he smells vinegar, and he's like, So he tells Layton and Grosky's not too sure, but Layton is like, do you see this boy? He is perfect height for smelling the cuffs of a man's sleeves, and he will know if they smell like vinegar. And Grosky's like, that is a really good point. They don't do anything at this time, though. Instead, they just meet with the director at the Wax Museum, and she shows them all the precautions that they've taken to protect the crown. So they've made a bunch of replicas of the wax figure of the king and replicas of the crown. So he's just like, so the real one's in like a room with a bunch of like fakes. That's their decision if that's how they wanted to handle it. But Luke's like, hold on, this wax figure of the king looks a lot like the magician Dark Saz. Moreover, the director, as part of like an anti-theft measure, has rigged the wooden floor to creak really loudly. Which begs the question, why not get a normal alarm system? But I digress. Clearly this is the perfect way to protect this crown. The real question is, which one of these replicas has the real crown? Sounds like a puzzle.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
We briefly see Madame Dubois, who when I read that name, I was like, isn't she in Cat's Game? But the lady in Cat's Game is Madame Dubois, so not the same person. So at this point, Dark Saz begins his big magician act, and we learn that he was actually only scheduled to do an act that very same morning. So, I don't know. Not to preemptively victim blame here, but it seems like very dumb to hire a magician at the last minute when you're, like, why are you hiring anyone at the last minute when a thief is targeting, like, what you're putting on display? I just feel like that's kind of stupid, but, you know, whatever, not my problem. Grosky stays behind to watch the crown, and Luke and Layton go to watch the show. So he starts his illusion, and using mirrors and lights, he makes it appear that he has a doppelganger, and I'm really scared of doppelgangers. Funnily a fact. So Layton explains to Luke how the trick works and is breaking the magician's rules, which I do not think is very gentlemanly. And Layton himself even says, like, oh, this isn't like a really good thing to do. And they're like, then don't tell him, don't break the magic. That's like, don't do that. Then Layton explains that he still wants to wait and see the deity play his hand before showing theirs. And I'm like, I don't know, bro. I don't think you have a creaky floor. That's what your hand is. You're just gonna let him steal it? I don't understand. But that's what Layton says. So during the show then, all of a sudden the lights go out, and they quickly come back on, and Dark Saz also looks confused. But then Layton goes to check on the crown, and Luke and Emmy are supposed to stay put and keep an eye on Dark Saz. But they do a bad job of this, and they leave because the room itself starts like shaking, and like, I get it, that's scary, but like, you're supposed to keep an eye on him. So then a bunch of police officers come into the building, and they explain that the wax figures of King George all started to like move and like come to life, and one of them was the Phantom Deity. So Grosky and Layton went after the deity, and they chased him all the way up to the roof. Luke sees the Phantom Deity climb onto the roof and the walls, and is like, okay, not Dark Saz, because Dark Saz is also outside. And then the deity flies away again, and on his way out, he like destroys the Wax Museum building. Like, the central tower of the building crumbles. And Lester shields Luke from the falling debris pieces and saves him. So thank you, Lester, because Layton wasn't here to save Luke. Again, it's a bit much. It's all very theatrical, but he did steal the crown. So because of how the tower collapsed and how the wall was constructed in the earlier museum, Luke is like, maybe he has to be an architect. Like, it's pretty impressive to like build something like that and then also like destroy a whole building, and also nobody was injured. That's like noteworthy. And Grosky points out that there was a rope that he escaped on and they need to follow it. So why don't you figure out where this rope leads?
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So they head into the bakery, and the baker is like, listen, people keep saying that the Phantom Deity escaped and hid in my attic, and I'm telling you he's not in my attic, but sure, just check for like my own safety of mine. I don't know. say ease of mind, my own ease of mind. Is that, I don't know, there's a phrase there, I can't remember it though, but for that. The attic, though, of the Bakers is coated in a layer of undisturbed dust, so they're like, well, so he didn't come in. And he didn't, he just used the roof. So he like tied the rope or connected the rope from the central tower of the wax museum to like the roof and then like climbed off the roof and like ran away and whatever. So our little crew, they stop to regroup and they are introduced to Lady Rolland, who is another investigator sent from the government. And she also is like rude and she wants Layton and Co off the case, but they're obviously going to stay on because like, who are you? So after meeting with Lady Rolland, they are summoned to Mr. Banks's estate, and Mr. Banks is like owner of a bunch of like steel factories, so they call him like a steel king. And on the way to his estate, they put together or like learn that everything that has been stolen so far was related to King Edgar VI, who executed 4 queens and dismantled a monastery and confiscated and sold art inside of it to avoid financial ruin. So I think basically when he beheaded 4 kings, basically he's like King Henry VIII, but that like caused him a bunch of like political turmoil and like financial turmoil. And in order to avoid that, he like took ownership over a monastery and confiscated everything in it and like dismantled it. And so that art included the crown and included the painting, included the sculpture that was stolen before the start of the story and everything else. So Luke is like, okay, that makes sense as a motive, like stealing things back that were stolen, but why do it so publicly and why do it in this way that is like so showy, but also he making such a case to not harm people? And Layton is like, well, maybe he's trying to get the public on his side, and if you hurt people, then like they're not on your side. Now, because the way he was like scaling the building and like climbing on stuff, we know he's kind of an acrobat. From the letter and some other things, we know he can paint. We know he knows a lot about art, and he knows a lot about architecture, and he steals and gives it to the poor. So that is our profile of who the Phantom Deity is right now. And Luke's like, okay, but I'm still stuck on like how he made it snow in summer outside of the museum. And Layton's like, oh, I'll never tell. And I'm like, but I want to know, why are we keeping secrets? You're here to help the police. Let's fact share, bro. You already broke the magician's rule. I'm like, I don't know. In this story, Layton's characterization, he seems so much like a bullshitter. I'm like, do you even know the things that you're saying? No. He's like, no, we'll just wait. I don't want to show the Phantom Deity my hand. I'm like, bro, we gotta weigh. Like, what hand did you have? Because I don't think it was a good one. But they get to Mr. Banks' estate, and here there's a rose garden maze with a rare book collection in the center, and in there is a book called The Demon King's Bible that was written about the Bible and the Quran and exorcism. And it was made by Thomas the Hermit, who wrote it when he was sentenced to solitary confinement. And Luke is like, wow, solitary confinement sounds awful. And Layton says, he was a hermit. I think he was quite pleased to continue his work like that. If he hadn't, he wouldn't have been able to produce such a beautiful manuscript. And I'm like, sir, he did not need to be imprisoned to do that. Like, Layton, do you think maybe he was called a hermit because he was in solitary confinement for decades? I don't think the jailers were like, you know, this guy's a hermit. We should probably put him in solitary confinement. But prison labor apologia aside, they get to talking to Banks, but then that lady Lacey Rolland is there, and she says she was brought by Howard Ruth, a young landscape architect. And he says, all right, well, we gotta go through the maze to get to the library. So why don't you help find a way through the maze?
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So they get to the library, and it's surrounded by a moat that Howard created, because again, he like created this whole place, and he created a puzzle that will reveal a bridge to the library, because he's not just a landscape architect, he is a criminal prevention architect. So, and then he's like, all right, let me solve this puzzle.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So the bridge appeared and they head inside the library. So Layton immediately is like, all right, let me guess. You are worried about the Banks collection because a lot of these books were stolen from the French church, aka they fit the bill of what the thief is targeting. And Banks is like, no, they're not stolen. I got these all the normal good way. And Grosky is like, ha, Layton, you're so smart. And Banks is like, yeah, no, a third of these books are actually stolen. They were bought on the black market. And I'm like, bro, why is Grosky not like doing anything about that? I don't think you can just admit that. But, you know, Grosky doesn't do anything because this is a rich man committing a crime. And that means it's okay. So, white collar crime apology aside, Banks explains that he bought the Demon King Bible from a legitimate auction. He's like, guys, I swear, I know a bunch of these books are stolen and bought off the black market, but this one wasn't. I swear to you, I bought it in a good way. He also got a threat from the Phantom Deity immediately after purchasing. And the threat says, when God confronts the devil, he walks on water. And Banks is worried that the deity might break in, steal the books, and learn about the bad people he got the other books from. And that those bad people would then come after his books and come after Banks because, like, he's, like, exposed, like, criminals. You know, criminals don't like when you, like, talk about them in public and whatnot. And Layton is, like, sympathetic, which I'm like, dude, no one cares. Like, you bought stolen books, bro. Like, you locked them in a garden protected by an anti-crime landscape architecture when, like, you're the criminal in the first place, and now you're wasting everybody's time and money to protect these books. So I'm on the Phantom Deity side here, all right? If you steal shit and people want it so bad that you're creating a maze and a moat that, also, I don't think I mentioned this before, but the moat is filled with special density water that, like, if you touch it, you'll, like, get, like, sucked in. It sounds like quicksand almost, but it looks like water. Like, maybe you should have stolen those in the first place. But whatever. They go to see the book, and they get on this, like, cylindrical elevator that Howard designed to see it. So it's in, like, sort of like a basement level. So they see it, and Howard's like, great book, love the art on this book. And Mr. Banks is like, it is an honor to have an artist of Howard's brilliance compliment the book. So Howard's an artist and an architect. Interesting. There's actually some, like, really like metal quotes in this. So also shout out to ProHow94 for translating them in a cool way. So here's some of them. This is exactly what a work of art is all about. The human being who creates something has to face God with his whole being and receive a revelation that penetrates the source of recreation. And only then can he create what is called a masterpiece. It's like, okay. And then Layton responds to that and says, but it is not only God that the artist must face. It is the devil. I'm like, oh, all right, Layton, I don't know what you've been through, but, well, I guess we do know what he's been through. But when Layton says that, Howard is, like, really startled, like, at the mention of the devil. Howard's like, oh. And Luke notices that, but he's like, I guess the devil is scary. Then the lights in the room start to flicker, and Howard is like, so if the power goes out, we're all going to die and suffocate because the room is airlocked. And the elevator won't work if the power goes out. And I'm like, well, that was not very smart of you to design it that way, all right? But so they rush to the elevator, and the power cuts off, and they get stuck in the elevator for a bit with Layton's lighter. So they're like Layton, like, lights it a little bit to, like, see stuff, but then the power comes back on, and they leave back into the hall on, like, the ground level. So they're all standing there like, wow, that was crazy, and Howard's like, I left my keys down there. And he's like, I'll go down there alone. And Luke is like, I'll go with him. And Grosky's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go too. So the three of them, they get down, and they get the key, but the book is gone. And again, Lacey Rolland was with them the whole time. So then when they come back up, Lacey is, like, a little slow to re-enter the room, which is a little weird. Luke's like, where is she? Why did it take so long? So they get back and they tell everybody that the book is gone. And Layton asks Howard, did you find your key? And Howard's like, yes. And he shows it to everybody. And so then Layton is like, actually, the book is still where it's supposed to be. You went into a different room. And then he explains that the cylinder elevator, like, turned. So, like, there were two rooms, and it went into, like, another room, because Yeah, that's what the Phantom Deity decided to do. So it turns out when Howard first dropped his key, Layton noticed and had a feeling he did it on purpose, so he picked up the key secretly. So then when Howard was like, yeah, I found it, he was like, no, you couldn't have, because I have it right here. And it was like a different key. He was just feigning to get down there again. And Howard's like, okay, you got me. I designed a whole replica room, Ocean's 11 style, just to steal the book and to blame it on the Phantom Deity. And Layton says to him, another good quote, "You've fallen under the spell of that book, haven't you? You've been seduced, not by God, but by the whispers of evil." And then he also says, "What is too attractive can infuse evil thoughts into people's mind." And I'm like, what are you, the Pope now? What is going on? So they head back to the original room they were in, and Lacey guards the elevator with her gun. She stays on the top floor with her gun and guards the elevator, and Layton is like, while we're in the elevator, it's time for a puzzle.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So they get back down to the real original library room that they were in, and the book is actually gone this time. So they rush back upstairs again, and Lacey is like, well, if Howard's here, then who was the Howard I just talked to? So the Phantom Deity dressed up as Howard, and while they were up talking, he was down there getting it, and they go into the reading room and they see the two Howards. So more doppelgangers. I don't like them. He's not a doppelganger for long because he takes off his disguise. He's obviously the Phantom Deity, and then he tries to escape. So even though the moat had that special like quicksand water I was talking about, the Phantom runs away over it, and Lacey tries to shoot him, but she misses and he gets away. So very eventful day at the mysterious moat-protected library in the middle of a rose maze. So they get back to London and they have a conversation where three main things happen. So one, Luke basically says that he thought Emmy was gay. That was interesting to me. Two, Luke says that he doesn't trust Lacey, and he's right. She's very, very suspicious. And three, they notice that the Phantom Deity is always disguised as the most obvious suspect, but the suspect is like a person who has a good alibi. Like, you know, there were two Detective Crawleys, there were two Dark Sawses, there were two Howards this time. So it's like weird because he's disguising himself as the person who they would immediately think, but then he like immediately disproves that it's like not them. So that's interesting. Alright, so chapter 4. While they're out shopping for tea, the deity shoots an arrow with a pamphlet into Layton's office, and the pamphlet is a program for a Chinese acrobat troupe show thing. So that is his target. Not sure what he's going to steal there, but maybe he's looking for an acrobat to join him in his thievery, again, Ocean 11 style. So they're looking at the pamphlet and they see an act called The King of the Vase, where a girl is stuck in a vase and she has to get out. It's like a contortionist act. And they're drinking and they're eating sweets, and Layton's like, puzzle time.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So after solving the puzzle, they head to the Chinese acrobatic tent because playing into the trap is part of the strategy. Again, I don't think Layton gives one shit about stopping these like thefts. He's just like, yeah, this seems fun. I want to see what's going on here. Like, he literally has not prevented a single thing, and you could argue that so far his presence has been an important plan. Like, without his presence there, the deity would have had to have another way to get in. Like, Layton was necessary for the Howard deity to get into the library. But I digress. So they left out before finishing Emmy's photos. So Emmy's been taking a bunch of pictures, and some of them like are still developing at the office, but they wanted to go see the acrobatic show. So after watching the acrobatic act, they try to figure out why the Phantom would like direct them here. But Layton thinks that it's a misdirect, and he thinks that this pamphlet was sent by someone else, that it was shot into his room by somebody not the Phantom Deity. a boy comes outside and says that he has something to give to a man in a silk hat named Layton. And Layton's like, cool, that's me. So he gives them an envelope, and it's containing a newspaper clipping of an ancient crystalline object. It's like almost like a crystal ball, but like it's not a ball, but I don't know, it's some like decahedron that is crystal. So that's the next target. So the boy said that a priest-like man in a cloak and colorful mask gave him the envelope. And then the man took off a bunch of masks, ultimately revealing an owl mask. And this like mask taking off thing was another part of like the act at like the Chinese acrobatic show. That was like somebody there also could do that. So that's interesting. But now they have another item to protect. So now it's like August 10th. This again, the book started in like June. Now it's August, and Duke of Halifax, the owner of the crystal, has left it in the Bank of London, left it in their vaults for safekeeping. So on August 10th, the bank is packed with cops from Scotland Yard following this note from the Phantom Deity. So with Lester, Emmy, Grosky, Lacey, and everybody there, they go to put this 30-sided crystal into the treasury vault. For like more safekeeping. Puzzle time.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
Before putting it in the vault, the officers inspect the vault, and they're like, yeah, it looks all good. And then Layton's like, okay, wait, actually one thing. And then Lacey's like, shut up. No one asked you. So all officers are like, yeah, I don't really care to hear what he has to say either. And they bring the crystal in. And the next day it disappears. And it was discovered missing because they went to give it another quality check, and they discovered that it had been replaced with a glass imitation. So it turns out that the vase used in the acrobatic act was in the vault, and a person exited the vase, made the swap, and then the person who owned the vase just came and picked it up the next day. And like, I know I keep making Ocean's 11 jokes, but like, is that not the same thing? Even down to the fact that the acrobatics are like both Chinese. Is this not the same thing? And the professor is like, yeah, I totally noticed that vase was in there, but Lacey showed me up. And I'm like, no, dude, you know what? I mean, she shouldn't have done that, but also like, you could have insisted a little more instead of just being like, yeah, okay. I just am like, come on, man, like you noticed. Meanwhile, the guy who brought in the vase, he can no longer be contacted because he was probably a fake dude. And Layton doesn't think that it was the actual Chinese acrobat that they saw in the show itself. Instead, he thinks that somebody stole the vase and then like did the act himself. That's what Layton thinks. And I'm like, yeah, for sure. The most important part of the act is the vase. Not the guy who can stuff himself in it and escape through a 4-inch hole. Like I said, I feel like I'm being really mean to Layton in this, but like, tell me if I'm being too harsh. I feel like he is like ridiculous in this book. I'm like, what are you talking about? The other thing too is like, I'm not gonna spoil the actual like ending yet, but like, I'm pretty sure that he is wrong about like most of the things. Like as I'm rereading this, as I'm saying it, I'm realizing like he's like wrong about a lot of the things he's saying. So I don't know, man. Maybe Layton's been replaced with the Phantom Deity because I don't know what he's doing in this one. And again, it's not a trick vase or anything. It's literally just a vase with like a small hole that the contortionist gets in and out of. So yeah. The other thing to note is that at this point, the Phantom Deity's skill set is like literally ridiculous because, again, to compare it to Ocean's 11 again, I'm sorry, but I have to. They literally have like every single person. Like in the movie, they like show them they need all these people, you know, with different skill sets, the pickpocketer, the contortionist, the hacker, like the bomb guy, like all those people. The Phantom Deity is just all of them. He's just all of them rolled into one. Puzzle time.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So now that a few more thefts have happened, they can confirm that all the stolen pieces were once owned by that abbey, St. Martin's Abbey, the one that the king like confiscated things from and sold. So they make this confirmation, and then they get this next target by another note shot with an arrow into a place, and And also because this target was written in Luke's notebook that he carries around, so I don't know when the Phantom Deity got a hold of that. But the next target is the last angel, and to learn more, they must go speak to a man named Father O'Flynn. And Layton still thinks that these messages are not from the Phantom Deity, but from someone else. So they head to Grosky's office to update him on this, and they find Lacey Rolland looking through Grosky's stuff, and she's like, "Oh, well, you were out, so I was being shown the documents of the case." Okay, sure. And Layton's confused too. Apparently she was looking for the areas where the Phantom Deity had disappeared so that they could ask for witnesses at the scene. And Layton's like, "Why do you want to know where the deity's been hiding?" And she's like, "Obviously to arrest him." And he's like, "No, you want to know where he's stashing the goods." Descalay. And she denies that first. She's like, "I'm not Descalay. I am Lacey Rolland." And then she's like, "You know what? No. I already have what I wanted, which was information on the last angel." Boom, costume change is Descalay, full on Descalay. And then on his way jumping out the window, Descalay says, "I'll give you one final prophecy. The final battle between you and the Phantom Deity will be on the Aldebaran." Because the government is soon going to transfer the last angel on this Aldebaran. It's like an airliner, and they're transferring it to Paris. Okay, so I'm editing the video now, and I don't know why I didn't realize this. Like, I feel like, I don't know, when I was reading, I was like, oh, Aldebaran sounds familiar. Aldebaran is the villain, spoiler alert, in the anime, in Catriel's anime for the, like, what's it called? The Relic Stone arc. So that's, like, kind of weird that that's, like, a random overlap. Like, I wonder if it's not an overlap, because I'm trying to think how this would work timeline-wise. Well, Aldebaran guy was, like, I think, like, a rich family who lived in, like, the olden days, and then, like, he kind of time travels, essentially, in, like, that anime plot. So, like, I guess it could be from his family, but I don't know. I thought that was really interesting, kind of like a little Easter egg. So let me know if you guys have any thoughts about that, if any of you have seen that arc of the anime. So with that, Descalay flies away, and Emmy and Grosky chase him, but to no avail. So they decide to find out more from Father O'Flynn and then board the Aldebaran. So that's the plan. All right, chapter 5. So they head to the town of Berkenstone, where St. Martin's Abbey is. And 20 years ago, there was an explosion at a sewage treatment plant in the town, and a lot of people died from chemical poisoning as a result. But the government never really did anything, and they never did anything because of a man named Mr. Lambert. And this is a man who was also, interestingly enough, at the Wax Museum when the crown was stolen. Puzzle time!
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
So they arrive at Penny Square, where they're again told that St. Martin's Abbey is in ruin, like a lot of things in this town. And they also learn that Stanley Royce is a man who has been helping the town recover in the government's absence. They learn that he's really nice and he's smart, but he's been missing for 2 years, although he still donates to this, it's like the orphanage. It's like the orphanage, and like, I keep forgetting the name. I think it's like a monastery. It's like where like the monks live, and then also they have like almost like Catholic school type things, or like church school, but it's also like an orphanage. So it's like an orphanage and like a school and like church stuff. So it's they call it the Owlry. So that's what that is. So Stanley Royce still donates to the Owlry and to the town. So this Owlry or orphanage, whatever, was created by Father O'Flynn after the explosion destroyed the town. And this man, Stanley Royce, is from the school there. So when Father O'Flynn created it, Stanley Royce was one of the kids there, and then he grew up. He went missing 2 years ago, and then he started donating money to the Owlry. Interesting. So, unfortunately though, Father O'Flynn was hit with a bad brain disease, maybe like a stroke or something, and now all he does is ramble about alchemy and the last angel. And Father O'Flynn was also always seen with birds. So Layton decides to see Father O'Flynn by himself, and he leaves Luke to watch the birds around the orphanage. So Layton returns after speaking with with the father, but they all go to the Abbey's ruins, and Layton's kind of keeping what he learned from Father O'Flynn to himself for now. And here they find a carrier pigeon, and they figure that this is how how one of the letters arrived at Layton's desk, is with a pigeon. They also find a very well-maintained flower bed, which is odd because the rest of the town and everything, or the rest of the abbey itself, is in ruins. And the flower bed has 2 handles on the side, so they lift it up and there's like a well under it. It was just like a cover, and there's a ladder going down. So they head down and they find a tunnel that was probably dug by the monks of St. Martin's Abbey. And based on what the father told him, Layton thinks that this tunnel was used for secret research that they did, and that the tunnels were passed on from the monks to the phantom deity. So there's a connection there. And also these tunnels, I think, lead like all over London, not just in Berkenstone. And this was helping the phantom deity escape, which makes sense, but also like he mainly escapes by like flying away. So like, I don't know, I kind of wish they had more scenes of them like, you know, turning down a street right after him and he's gone or something like that. Because this thing kind of, to me, came a little bit out of nowhere when I was reading it. But Luke and Layton both agree that based on these clues, Stanley Royce is the phantom deity. Chapter 6. So now, after talking to Father O'Flynn about the Last Angel and learning things that we don't know yet, they decide to board the luxury airliner, the Aldebaran. And at this point, how many luxury vehicles has Luke been on? Or maybe not at this point, but in the series total, I've got the Monetary Express, the cruise ship in the Eternal Diva, right? That's in that. They go on another airliner, Azerin Legacy. Like, am I missing anything? This dude's like, he's on luxury vehicles all the time. Today, also, is a solar eclipse, my favorite Twilight. So they're here on the Aldebaran to guard the Last Angel because the phantom deity is determined to steal it on the day of the solar eclipse because that's his symbol and everything. You ask me, if I'm transporting something on the solar eclipse and there's a thief running around who loves solar eclipse imagery, I'm changing the date. I'm not moving it on that day. Just think it's wise. But as the title suggests, no one cares about my thoughts. Mr. Lambert, the government official responsible for doing nothing in Birkenstock, is in charge of the convoy, which is odd. So Mr. Lambert explains to our little crew that they are going to unveil the Last Angel for passengers right at the solar eclipse. That's going to start in 30 minutes. So they really just have to guard the angel until then. Because again, at this point, like, we don't know what the Last Angel is. They just keep talking about it. So Emmy gives Luke some eclipse glasses to watch the eclipse, and she gives him a puzzle.
That should do it. Every puzzle has an answer.
After Luke solves the puzzle, the group realizes that many characters from earlier on are on the ship. So we've got Howard Ruth, Madame Du Bois, Dark Saws. But this doesn't really make sense because the tickets to this, like, on this airliner were, like, really expensive. And so, like, maybe Madame Du Bois could, like, afford it, but no one else could. So they're like, that's weird. But they don't have much time to think about what that means because now it's time to unveil the Last Angel. And Mr. Lambert unveils it, and the Last Angel is, take your final guesses. If you guessed a weird brown egg, you were right. It's a weird brown egg that has a Midas-like substance inside it that can turn hazardous waste into gold. So, I think you figured that out. No, I'm kidding. What is that? But the monks of St. Martin, they found this substance in the course of some alchemical research when they were trying to learn how to remove toxic waste in the Birkenstone factory. And this substance is a bacteria, which again, I guess they found it in the course of their alchemical research, but alchemy is not biology, but whatever. I don't know. I'll let it slide. This whole thing's like very Layton-esque, aka very like just out of left field and like funny and ridiculous. The bacteria is preserved in iron, so that's why it's in the egg. But the monks kept this a secret until Father O'Flynn had his brain issue and started to ramble about it and was unable to like keep the secret. So this likely gave the phantom deity his grand plan. Like the same time he went missing, or the same time Stanley Royce went missing is the same time the phantom deity started stealing, is the same time that, like right after Father O'Flynn had a stroke. So Layton says that Lambert and everybody doesn't know the power of the Last Angel, which is like really weird. Like he's basically saying that like everybody in the room is only like, wow, the Last Angel, because they know that the phantom deity wants to steal it. And so they're like, okay, well, therefore it must be valuable. But that, like, doesn't really make sense, I don't think, like, with the whole timeline of everything. Because they're saying that Mr. Lambert, the owner of the egg, doesn't even know the power that it has to, like, change things into gold. But I don't know. That seems, like, weird. But, again, we'll buy it. So the eclipse starts, everyone looks, and when they turn back, the glass case is empty and the angel is gone. And Luke is like, okay, well, let's just search everyone. But then the deity appears behind a goddess statue, and Luke's like, Stanley Royce, I know it's you under that mask. And Layton's like, nope, it's not. You're wrong. And 5 more phantom deities appear from the first, so it's like this like Dark Saw's like doppelganger trick thing again. And this all happened during the course of the eclipse, and so then the eclipse ends right after that. So Layton clarifies that what he meant when he said it wasn't Stanley Royce is that the phantom deity in front of them is Dark Saw's, but then he says Dark Saw's is not Stanley Royce. So that's confusing because we know just last chapter they said that he was, like, Stanley Royce was the phantom deity. So what is going on? So Layton starts to give his little end of game speech with the 5 phantoms motionless on the stage. There have been a series of cases involving the phantom deity. In each of these cases, the culprit has not been identified. Wherever a lead suspect was identified, the phantom deity always appeared alongside him. In other words, all the suspects had a strong alibi, and the characteristics of every suspect were all very different. Inspector Grosky then said regretfully, sometimes the phantom knew a lot about art, sometimes he could use magic, and sometimes he had special skills that allowed him to move through small spaces. I also interjected, that's right, I've been wondering where you could find someone with all these different characteristics. But the truth is, it's very simple. Everyone was silent, waiting with bated breath for the professor's next words. The professor took a deep breath and said, the phantom deity wasn't alone. I said with a start, he wasn't alone? What does that mean? In other words, there were multiple offenders. Various people wore masks and played the phantom deity depending on the situation. That's why we couldn't identify a definitive character. What? So after this reveal, one of the deities throws a small bag containing the last angel at Grosky, who catches it and is very confused. And then it's kind of revealed that Lambert was actually trying to steal the last angel, and he was going to pin it like on the phantom deity. And so then the phantom deity came to like steal it back from the guys who were stealing it, kind of like national treasure. But then 8 armed men appear and threaten to fire on everyone. So like Lambert's the bad guy. And Grosky is like, well, don't do that. The ship is run with hydrogen gas and it's going to explode. Just then, some object creates a hole under Luke, and he almost falls through it and out of the airship. But Layton grabs his arm, because it turns out that Lambert had drilled holes into the ship and rigged the floorboards to collapse if he wanted them to. And so the cops are like, okay, well, because again, there were cops on the ship to like protect the egg in the first place, but they're like, okay, well, these guys can't fire like their guns because it'll explode. So they rush all the guys and they subdue them. And then the phantom deities, they like are attached to wire and they're like hanging from the ceiling, and they trap Mr. Lambert up there. So Lester, the Bobby, he goes to take the angel from Grosky's hands so Grosky can climb a ladder and get Lambert, but Layton is like, not so fast. You are Stanley Royce, leader of the Phantom Deity. And all the officers are like, that can't be right. Lester has been on the force for 2 years. At the same time, Royce disappeared from Birkenstone, and at the same time that the Phantom Deity started stealing. And this was confirmed by Emmy, because Emmy, our little photographer, she had taken pictures of just stuff, and Lester was in the background. Layton, I guess, had this theory, and so they took a picture and showed it to a nun back at the Owlery and confirmed that Lester was Royce. So while Layton is now talking to Stanley Royce and like saying all this to him, all of the little deities, they take Lambert to a part of the ship where he manages to escape into the cockpit. And so at this point, he takes over controls and is trying to kill everybody by crashing the airship into the ground. I guess he's like, we're all going down. I'm not going down alone. But while he's going crazy with the controls, Royce is like, okay, well, I'm going to go into the cockpit and stop him. But then the last angel falls out of Grosky's bag and starts to roll near all these holes that have been drilled into the floor. And so Luke grabs the surprisingly heavy egg, but it's like heavy, it like throws off his balance a little bit, and so he gets knocked over, and then the egg rolls through the hole and into the sea off of the White Cliffs of Dover. So, goodbye, egg. Luke also falls through the hole, but Royce catches him by the arm, and then Lambert appears behind Royce, So Royce is like, okay, pulls Luke out really quickly, but then Royce gets shot, and he throws himself onto Luke to shield him from the gunfire, but then Royce gets shot again, and Luke describes how he can feel it hitting him when like he can feel the impact of the bullet hitting Royce because it hits him, like it pushes Royce into him, which I'm like, that's such a visceral description for like a book, even though it's not like gory or anything. That was just like, oh my god, that hit me a bit. Layton takes Emmy's camera and uses it to break an aquarium that was on the Aldebaran, and because the aquarium's behind Lambert, so he breaks it, and the water comes in and knocks over Lambert, and Grosky and the cops arrest him. So after this, the Aldebaran lands pretty safely near the French border, because again, they were on their way to fly to Paris. Royce is still alive but badly injured and losing a lot of blood, and he tells Luke that he started all this because his dream was to change the world by exposing and destroying evil and seeking revenge and salvation. So an ambulance arrives with the police, and all the other deities reveal themselves. So we have Dark Saws, Howard Ruth, King Lulin, who was the king from the act. This is what I mean. You remember when Layton was like, oh, I don't think it was the actual guy. I think it was just the vase. It was the person. It was the person who did the act. I don't know why he said that. He's just like wrong in this one. A couple other people named Miss Pamela, Director Crowley, Jonathan Harvest, who ran the bakery. So basically like anybody they'd interacted with, they all were phantom deities because they all had connections to Father of Flynn and to this owlery. A lot of them like grew up there too. So Luke says his goodbye to Royce because again, like throughout this, he was kind of bonding with the Bobby. Anyways, all the deities get arrested. This ending also bothers me because like they don't, again, I'm not doing a rating on this because it's obviously not like a game. It'd be hard to do, but so many things go unanswered. They're just like, why did Dark Saws smell like vinegar? That's weird. A couple of other things too didn't really make sense. Like when Director Crowley, so he was the one involved with the Museum of London. Was he Director Crowley disguised as the deity disguised as Director Crowley? Or was it one of the other ones disguised as somebody else? Like same thing with the art museum. Or not the art museum, with the same thing with the wax museum. Was that somebody else disguised as Dark Saws, and then Dark Saws was actually downstairs? I think so, but I don't know. It's interesting. All right, so in the epilogue, they're all back at Layton's office. It's a fair bit after the conclusion of things. And they're kind of just talking about the case, and Luke's struggling with the idea of like, you know, thinking Stanley Royce is a good guy, but you know, that he did bad things. And Lane kind of explains that it was really hard what they went through, and like with Birkenstone getting destroyed, and you know, that Lambert's a bad guy, and you know, when bad things happen to good people, sometimes like moral grayness happen. And they talk about how it's like really great that all the phantom deities, like that they all had each other, because again, they were all like kind of friends at this monastery for the most part. It's like, that's really nice. And then they talk about how they can't find, like they tried to find the last angel in the ocean, but like they can't. And then the last thing is Luke is like, okay, but how did he make it snow? You never told me how he made it snow. Professor is like, oh, well, there were balloons floating in the sky. He put artificial snow inside the balloons from crushed ice and then released it into the sky to be, like, dropped down. And he says that he knows this because Stanley Royce told him. So I'm like, so were you bluffing when Luke asked earlier before you knew who Stanley Royce was? Because I think you were bluffing. I don't think he actually knew then. But there we go. That's how we know. The very last thing that happens is that a pigeon comes to the window. And it like reminds Luke of Father of Flynn, and then they go over to the pigeon, and it has a piece of parchment wrapped around its leg. Professor comes, he reads it and says, Luke, I've got another interesting puzzle for you. And that's the end of it. I believe that's teasing the third book. I really enjoyed reading this book. I definitely think this is like one of the more outrageous Layton things, and I think that's because, like, honestly, It's so funny. It almost reminds me of not Azrin Legacy. It almost reminds me of Miracle Mask a little bit, where I feel like the little cases within the larger case, each little case is actually like more like really insane. I feel like that's actually more common in the things that are later, like in the prequel trilogy, and then a lot of these novels that came out later. Like I feel like with the original trilogy, the day-to-day stuff isn't too crazy, but the big mystery is like so outlandish. Whereas with this, like the big mystery of like a bunch of friends coming together to steal from the rich because and to donate it to their town that's been like struck by like a horrible tragedy, and then the government didn't do anything with it. That's not surprising. I think I read one of the other novels, although the titles are really similar. I think I read Illusory Forest. That was also crazy. Like the novels just have a like different feel to them, which is really fun. I'm glad that they're novels because for some reason I just don't really feel like this would work in a game. I think this would be a little boring in a game. Obviously there's fewer puzzles, although I think the puzzles are fun. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. I really enjoy reading these, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of them. But they're also just like, I don't know, they're so crazy. They got such a different vibe. I feel like you get a different feel of Luke because it's from his perspective. Definitely Layton is like different in this. I also feel like Layton's pretty different in the anime, and some of you guys have said that too. So it's pretty, I just find it fascinating. Like the characterization of the characters is like pretty different in different aspects of the series, which makes sense because I think they're written by like different groups a lot of times. I don't know, I might be wrong on that, but let me know what your thoughts are. So, sort of the TLDR of this is, after following all these art thefts and appearing at the crimes, they discovered that first that Duskleigh is involved in this because he wanted to steal the art back from the Phantom Deity, who is this art thief. But after discovering that, then they realized that the Phantom Deity is actually a group of thieves who were all part of a like monastery orphanage when they were younger. They lived in that orphanage because their town underwent a horrible chemical explosion and they were abandoned by the government. So after that horrible tragedy, they went to live in this orphanage, and they banded together and they decided to steal from the rich and give to the poor. And they target things based on if they were from the abbey that is linked to their monastery, that they steal those items. And then they were building up to this grand item that they were hoping to steal, which is called the Last Angel, because it had a substance, an almost alchemical substance that turned toxins into gold. And this first belonged to the monks of the abbey, but it was, I believe, stolen from them, and they wanted to steal it back. I assume to use the substance to help clean up Birkenstone and help clean up other areas that have been destroyed by like pollution or something and abandoned by government. And the main leader of the Phantom Deity was a man named Stanley Royce, but this whole novel, he was disguised as Lester, who was a bobby in Scotland Yard, and he had been in that disguise for 2 years. So that is the TLDR. But yeah, so let me know what you guys think of the novel. I think they're really fun. Let me know what you thought of the puzzles, and also maybe the editing if you'd like the editing. I had a fun time editing those and photoshopping them, even though it's, and I'm sure people could do a lot better. And then the last thing is, if you like this video, please give it a like. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, but you like the videos and you like to watch them, please, consider subscribing. But thank you so much for watching. I read all the comments basically, and I love reading your guys' thoughts. I don't know, you guys are just so insightful, and I don't know, I just like talking to you guys in the comments. So leave a comment if you have any thoughts on this, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye!